Hello, this is Sabrina McBride. This is my topical presentation on dystopian young adult fiction. And for this presentation, I'd really like to focus on why dystopian young adult fiction is so popular today and why it is so important for teens to read. And on kind of a subtopic, I am also going to be taking a look at how parenthood is treated and practiced in a post-apocalyptic world. As I'm going through the topic, I will also be discussing some excellent titles that provide examples of the genre, and I'd really like to discuss why they're so important for teens to read and why we need to make sure that these titles are available in our collections in the Monroe School District. In order to discuss the topic of dystopian young adult fiction, I'd like to first kind of take a look at the definition of dystopia. I think it really helps helps you get an idea of what this type of fiction is really about. And so Merriam-Webster has the definition that it is an imaginary place where people lead dehumanized lives and often fearful lives. And the Oxford English Dictionary definition says it is an imagined state or society in which there is great suffering or injustice, typically one that is totalitarian or post-apocalyptic. In order to really grasp this topic, I decided to read the following 6 titles. They include the entire Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins, including The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. I also read The Giver by Lois Lowry, Quarantine, The Loners, which is the first book of this series by Lex Thomas, and Shipbreaker, which is also the first book of that series. And while reading all of these titles, I really began to think about why dystopian young adult fiction is so popular with teens. Many of these have been made into movies, and many other dystopian novels have been made into movies, including the Divergent series. And so I really started to think about why they are so popular today, especially with teens. And it really seems to me that teens can relate to these worlds. They're very well written. They have very realistic characters, even though they are in some really, terrifying storylines. They are all still very believable in many ways, and I think teens can relate to those worlds. They can see how today's world could easily evolve into those terrifying worlds, and I think they can also see how these stories are reflections of today's world. They can even see their own worlds, their own lives in high school being reflected in these titles in many ways, including the different cliques that they see in their daily lives and bullies and things like that. They're all represented here in these titles. While reading all of these titles, I began to notice certain characteristics that seemed to stand out within all of them. And typically they all seem to include post-apocalyptic circumstances, teen characters, especially the main characters. Generally, there's some evil form of authority to fight against, whether that is corrupt government or a corrupt gang that is controlling the community. Generally there is some kind of journey for a character or dangerous conditions to survive. And there's always a strong, courageous protagonist. And there's definitely always a storyline that acts as a metaphorical mirror for our own present-day society. Also, teens are the heroes in these stories. These titles tend to lack a parental presence. Typically, there are no adults or parents in the storyline, and if there are parents, they are generally very toxic characters, or basically just kind of absent and not very helpful. So all of these titles are considered very controversial, and so I'd like to discuss why there is so much controversy surrounding these titles. First of all, I would definitely like to point out that in our school district, it would typically be the parents that will complain about these titles. Parents may not agree with the portrayal of parental figures in the books, or during a teen's adolescent years, parents find themselves struggling to keep their parental authority with their children. Therefore, they may not agree with titles like these that inspire readers to fight back against authority figures. These titles are a reflection of our society, so many social issues are also included in the books, including drug abuse, alcoholism, rape, physical abuse, bullies, toxic parents. Parents may argue that they do not want their children exposed to these kinds of topics. Our city of Monroe, Washington is definitely a sleeper community, with many residents living here and commuting off to Seattle or Bellevue. Their commute can be anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on traffic conditions. To me, that definitely signifies the fact that many parents are not at home with their teens. It may not be by their own choice necessarily, but they have large commutes, they have long work days. This is typical in a lot of places, but I think it is especially typical here where we have such a long commute for many of our residents. And I think teens here will really relate to some of these titles that tend to lack a parental presence. I think they already feel like they are sometimes surviving on their own, and so reading about these teens that are surviving without adults can definitely, I think, be therapeutic for them. We have two high schools here with a total of 2,607 students, and two middle schools with a total of 1,205 students. Here are some more statistics about our community in Monroe, Washington. Uh, Generally, we are a bit of a higher income area. However, it's not all that evident from these numbers, but there is quite a visible divide between the different classes here. There's a very distinct division between lower income and higher income areas, and I think this can definitely be something that teens will relate to as they read these dystopian novels and they read about the different clashes between the very different economic statuses represented in these titles. That's usually a very big topic in a lot of the titles, especially the Hunger Games. So I'd like to talk a bit further about these titles that I read. I think they are definitely controversial titles that we should definitely include in your collection here in Monroe. I think they are essential. Shipbreaker is the first title I'd like to talk about. It's written by Paolo Bacigalupi. I believe that is the correct way to pronounce it. This title is very well written, and it's interesting because the post-apocalyptic world that it is set in was caused by environmental issues. And in today's world, I think we can all definitely see how that could possibly not be all that far off from being a reality. It's set in the Gulf Coast region of the United States, and the destruction was caused by environmental issues like the over-drilling of oil and building in flood zones. In the storyline, hurricanes, which they call city killers, happen constantly, and so there is always constant destruction from that. And the main character works as a shipbreaker who scavenges copper wiring from grounded oil tankers from the past. There is a definite, very visible divide between the rich and the poor, a very extreme divide. And the shipbreakers are so poor that they're basically treated like animals, and sometimes even less than animals. This title can be very therapeutic for teens to read because it also includes some social issues that I think our teens can identify with from today's world as well. Like I said, these titles are basically work like mirrors on today's society. So this title definitely involves some social issues. In this storyline, the main character's mom had passed away, and his dad is a very toxic character. His dad is present, but his dad is a drug addict who is very physically abusive to the main character. So he's definitely not a good parental figure. But I think the drug addiction, the physical abuse, these are all issues that teens can identify with and can maybe take solace in seeing other people going through these kinds of issues. The second book that I'd like to talk about is Quarantined Loners by Lex Thomas. This is the first book of a large series, and essentially with the rise of with the threat of biological warfare in today's world, this terrifying world that is presented in Quarantine doesn't seem all that far-fetched. In the story, an infected teenager escapes and runs into a brand new high school to hide, and it just so happens to be the first day of school. Everyone's kind of just milling around trying to find their classes, and the government feels that this infection is so dangerous that they have to blow up part of the school. So they blow up part of the school and they immediately lock the school down with everyone inside. All of the teens are then infected with this illness, and the infection acts like a parasite within adolescence. However, it immediately kills any adults that the teens come in contact. Therefore, there are no adults in the storyline. The main character speaks kindly of his dad, but he is, obviously not there in the school, and all of the adults that were there are dead at that point. It's very similar to Lord of the Flies. We see the interaction of teens stranded together without adults. Eventually, they split into various clique gangs, including the varsities, the sluts, the skaters, the pretty ones, etc. And essentially, it really emphasizes the power of the darkness within us all. Many social issues are also included in this storyline as well. I think teens can definitely identify with issues surrounding gangs, bullies, rape, and physical abuse. The Giver by Lois Lowry is definitely one of my favorite books. The story begins as the main character Jonas reaches the age of 12, and he's nervously awaiting the community event that will depict his lifetime role in the community. He soon learns that he's receiving a very unique role that is respected in the community. He will be the keeper of all of the memories of the past. In this community, the other members do not have any memories of the past, so the details of his role are kept very secret from the community. He is training with a man who is giving him all of these memories, and it's very intense. And Jonas feels increasingly distant from everyone else because he's having to keep all these secrets, and nobody really knows what he's going through. He grows closer to the man that he calls the Giver, who is the person that is giving him all the memories. and at the same time he grows more distant from his friends and family. During his training, he learns that the community has taken away all unpredictable variables to ensure that there's a sameness for everyone. He learns that essentially there's no weather, that people don't even know what weather is or what animals are. And he didn't either until he started receiving these memories. In fact, he didn't even know what color was until he started receiving the memories. There's no divide between the rich and the poor in this storyline. There's no racism, but basically this community has also taken away their freedom of choice. Yes, they've provided them with a very equal footing and a very, what seems like a very nice community, but underneath it all, there's no freedom of choice and really no love, or no families are not typical families. They are, there's two parents and they are given the children who are actually born to different mothers. So it is not the same kind of family that would really, they don't have close relationships. They don't even really know, or the parents don't even really know what love is. The Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins is an extremely popular series, both in print and on the screen, and it's definitely made an impact, I believe. In the storyline, the U.S. is now a dystopian nation called Panem. It's split into 12 districts that are kept in the dark regarding the wealth of the capital. The districts are starving, while the capital is ridiculously rich. And you can see that pretty clearly in the picture on the right of Katniss and Peeta, and then of Effie Trinket in the middle, and she's from the capital. So you can tell by her clothes that there's definitely a divide between the wealthy and the poor. And the president of Panem orchestrates a yearly televised event where the children of the districts are forced to battle to the death. He does this to kind of keep the districts in control and to basically take away any hope that they may have for the future. He basically wants them to be afraid. And Katniss, or be afraid of fighting back, basically, of what the consequences could be if they tried. Katniss Everdeen is a teenage girl in District 12, and when her younger sister is called to take part in the battle, she volunteers to take her place. As the games unfold, Katniss soon becomes a favorite for many in the capital. However, in the surrounding districts, she becomes a symbol for the revolution. She eventually becomes the Mockingjay. The trilogy follows Katniss through 2 televised Hunger Games and the Revolution. Katniss fights for a more equal distribution of wealth, and she also fights for an end to the meaningless violence that was forced upon them by the districts. The interesting thing to note about the parental presence in this title is that her father, Katniss had definitely had a close relationship with her father, and but he had died in an explosion, and when he died, her mom basically just kind of checked out. She became useless, and so Katniss had to basically learn to survive and to provide for her mom and her little sister. Her dad had taught her how to hunt with a bow, so she would sneak off and hunt to keep them alive, to feed them. And her strength when she has to go in the arena in the Hunger Games, basically she has 2 strengths, and those are physical and mental. And the physical part is that she has that hunting expertise that her dad had given her, and then her mental strength came from already having to survive on her own before. She was already used to having to survive. So basically her mom's absenteeism gave her the strength she needed to get through the games. Why are these titles so important for your collection? We live in a violent culture. Essentially, violence is everywhere, and our teens are very aware of the dangers that are surrounding them. School shootings, bullies, toxic teachers, etc. They are very aware, and this is a excellent quote by Professor Bodart um, that I think really kind of reflects why we need to have these titles. It says that trying to protect children and teens from the world that they live in now and that will help shape them in the future is not only futile, it is dangerous. They have to know how to survive the perils that may wait for them, no matter their ethnicity, their social class, their economic status, or their status among their peers. It's essential they know when to flee, when to fight, and how to do both most effectively and efficiently. Dystopian titles, as I said, act as a metaphorical mirror of our own violent society. These titles are full of heroic characters, though, that are strong-willed, and by reading about these heroes on the page, teens can fight these evil forces from the safe perspective of a book. This gives them courage and hope for the future. And reading about post-apocalyptic worlds can make a teenager's daily problems seem less intense by comparison. In fact, it can make an adult's daily problems seem less intense by comparison. Since these titles are a reflection of our own society, many social issues that I mentioned are portrayed in the storylines. The abusive father, physically abusive boyfriend, drug addiction, rape, gang violence, alcoholism. Reading about others going through these issues can be therapeutic for someone who's going through one of these issues or who may know someone who is. Essentially, these books are a comfortable place to learn about the dark side of life and the darkness we all find within ourselves. In The Abundant Community, McKnight and Block discuss how, in today's fast-paced, consumer-driven world, families find themselves more disconnected than ever. Family members find themselves plugged into their media devices during their free time, and most parents find themselves working long hours to support themselves. With parents out of the home most of the time, teenagers are left to raise themselves with little advice from adults. Teens may find comfort in reading stories about other teens who are learning to survive without their parents or adults. Therefore, I think these titles can be very important for them. They can certainly reflect what the characters portrayed in these storylines. We must make sure that these titles are available for our teens. If you are confronted about a specific title in your library, please consult the Library Bill of Rights and the ALA Code of Ethics and for inspiration and support. And if you don't have one already, I would immediately put together a materials selection policy using the Library Bill of Rights and ALA Code of Ethics. I have here the Library Bill of Rights and the Code of Ethics for your reference. I'd like to thank you for listening and watching my presentation. The references are coming up here. And for your own use at home, I have included two flyers. One includes the references here, and the other includes the list of titles that I used, along with some helpful articles that you may be able to use to back up your arguments for why these titles are so important. So again, thank you for your time.